Great. Welcome, Michael and David. A big, huge welcome.
Thank you.
And, the discussion till now has been fairly high level. We've been discussing why goals are needed and why they have to be translated into action on the ground. However, changing dynamics on the ground sometimes make even the most modest goals a challenge. So I want to see if we could talk about the current context in Afghanistan based on your work there or other difficult circumstances where, a goal and delivering on a goal has been really, really hard and kind of difficult. Mr. Coker, may I start with you?
You may. Safina, thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking Education Above All Foundation for the opportunity to be here today, and we are very delighted a couple hours ago to sign an MOU with them for a global collaboration on getting out of kids out of school, back into school, beginning, we hope, this year in Afghanistan. The Aga Khan Development Network, Aga Khan Foundation, AKF, has worked in Afghanistan now for more than 3 decades. The foundation itself has about 12,000 staff. We work in 9 provinces, 3,000 villages, and we have not closed our offices for a day since last August. And we have maintained and in fact are in the process of expanding our education efforts. And how do we do that? The short answer is, I think Malala said it, we are community-led. Our staff are 99.9% Afghan. They're from those villages where we work. And it's a simple model, but it's not always easy to do. You engage with communities, you're in a constant state of dialogue with them, you adapt, you adjust your programs. We're talking to moms and dads, community leaders, local mullahs, the students themselves, aunts, uncles, you name it. And what is it that they want? What is it that we can do? And look, there is all kinds of discussion now, a huge amount of tension, a great disappointment on the announcement that girls can't go to school. I think the task at hand is what can we do right now under these circumstances as things evolve. And I think something that's maybe underappreciated, certainly underinvested in, is community-led schools, community-based education. That can take a lot of shapes. There are parent-teacher groups, teacher training is possible. You can equip community-based schools. There are tutoring programs, there are accelerated learning programs for children that are out of school. And I think it goes to, I think each of the panelists, at least 3 of them, made the key point. Education for children really is a fundamental human right. People say it. I don't think that's sufficiently codified anywhere, and I think we've seen some symptoms of that by, whereas, and it should be, food security and health have gotten investments, significant investments since last August. That's not been the same for education. No one operational in Afghanistan is naive. We understand the challenges, we understand them very well, but there are ways, even today, to invest in children's education, and it must happen.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. I think the kind of ways in which we've had to pivot, we had to do like relief work, we had to do food delivery, we had to take kids for, take their parents for vaccinations. We're no longer an education organization.
Well, I think humanitarian work should encompass education by definition. And I think if one might set an audacious goal, it is investing in education, regardless of the circumstances, as intelligently as you can.
Yeah. And you're so right. We saw the same thing, that if the schools were closed, and we had schools in India were closed for over 500 days, right? And we just had to take education to the doorstep of the child because there is no other option. So I completely, that's exactly what we were seeing on the ground and what everybody had to pivot. Mr. Edwards, you're working with teachers and the organizations in Afghanistan. How's everything for you?
It's better for me than it is for them right now. I just received a statement just about 15 minutes ago, which is their statement. So the teachers' organizations, we have 2 member organizations, Education International has, that they are deeply disappointed by the decision not to reopen schools, and the teachers are starting an advocacy campaign across the country. As we are already seeing, they're actually joining students, calling for the schools to be open. But you know, let's just say they were sort of, there was some skepticism early days. Teachers weren't paid for the first few months after August, and a lot of the donors were trying to figure out how that was even going to happen. Organizations that were on the ground, the community schools actually were able to sort of support in ways, I think, so there are lessons there. But I think it's a really difficult time. There's a lot of hope, there's a lot of trepidation. The teachers around the world have been building solidarity with them, so they're not alone. And I think one of the things is that in tumultuous times is to have solidarity. And it's also to be at the table. One of the other things that I think they've appreciated, and GPE was here, and UNICEF, and Aga Khan, is that when the different organizations come through, they actually come to the table and talk to teachers and hear about what their needs are. And so they backward map from basically what the instructional and support needs of teachers are versus just telling them what to do, treating them like subjects versus objects.
I think that's really, really important. Michael, Aga Khan Foundation works in many insecure countries. What do you do if your funding partners become extremely cautious or risk averse? And because, I mean, we saw this in the pandemic. A lot of our donors kind of said, well, when schools open, give us a call. And we're like, but we have an organization, we have staff, we're still serving children. I mean, donors can sometimes just be very, very, very risk averse. How do you handle that?
We have experienced that, certainly. COVID, as you say, but Afghanistan obviously has resulted in that for a range of reasons, geopolitical concern with the transition in the government, and obviously for a number of countries, concerns about sanctions as well. I think we're fortunate how we handled it as Aga Khan Foundation. We're fortunate that we have some internal resources to bring to bear, certainly. But we also have a diversified donor base that helps us. So we're not overly reliant anywhere. You know, we're not donor dependent or donor driven. That said, we spend a lot of time in various capitals engaging donors and trying to get them to pivot. That's not simple, but we're at it. I think another donors, partnership generally. You can't approach education through sort of a one-year grant, right? I mean, it just doesn't work. You're not going to measure anything meaningfully in a year, and I may be anticipating questions, but the importance of anchor funding. I think. For education, we have to think about generational funding. That's the only way meaningfully that you're going to do it, and that takes a commitment beyond election cycles, beyond the geopolitical realities of the day. And an example, we have what we call a flexible fund that we utilize in Afghanistan, and we're able to, and through some of our internal resources, but also through donors that are understanding of these issues, and it allows us to make some adjustments. What are some of the obstacles in Afghanistan to girls' education? Well, a number of things, but some of the things that maybe don't get enough attention. Some schools are too far away from a given community or village, and parents are nervous about their girls going to school. Well, we can use flexible funding to arrange transportation, or we can use flexible funding to put a community-based school, community-run school, in that place, or that they want more women teachers, flexible funding to train women teachers, and this can be very tailored. So I think, think global, act local. It's been said, but it has to be put into practice with discipline. I think that's some of the means by which we navigate this. Thank you.
No, thank you. Because I think it's kind of common sense. You can't parachute in, parachute out in 1 year. Our own children's education takes more than a decade. And so why should a poor child's education be an investment of year-on-year grants? So I think it's a really critical piece, and I love what you're saying. It's about a generational funding is what we need. We work in villages and we stay there for 6 to 8 years because we want to make sure that, X number of cohorts are actually finishing schooling. Otherwise, it's worthless. But I also, I like what you're talking about, the flexible funding and things. But what do you think about anchor funding? Do you have any kind of anchor funding, or how do you think about financing or funding or?
For Education International?
Yeah.
We're completely self-funded by the teachers of the world.
Wonderful.
So 32 million teachers who are our members fund us. So we actually don't take very much outside funding. We made an exception recently for our Afghan Teacher Rights Observatory.
Right.
But we think anchor funding is, we think predictable, sustainable, long-term funding that's domestically based. I think 95% of the financing has to come in order to reach what our chair of GP was talking about, and Malala is 95% of that is going to have to come from domestic resource mobilization as well.
Absolutely. And what do you see as the role of influence in relation to impact?
It's an interesting question, and I know my friend Mary Joy really takes this, and that's why I'm here. Educators, they like to call us knowledge workers, but we like to think of ourselves more as wisdom workers. So teachers are in every single community in the world. And although we're not the best paid, it's not the best paid profession, no one goes into teaching to get rich, they have a lot of influence on the lives of communities and young people. And the aggregation of that influence is a deep responsibility that we carry at EI. And so I think what we try to do is ensure that we take that responsibility of aiming that influence in ways that are consistent with our values and are sure to translate into meaningful support in terms of conditions, learning conditions, teaching conditions, teachers' voice, ensuring that there's spaces, because we work in, Myanmar, where, how many teachers was it? 400,000 teachers were fired when the junta took over, right? So the influence we have there is as workers, working with all the other global federations to be able to kind of close off and put pressure on the junta there. But same thing if we're thinking about, Yemen, if we're thinking about Palestine, if we're thinking about Afghanistan, the elevation of teachers' voice in order to have impact is say, first, you have rights and you matter for the children, but then also to talk to governments about their obligation to make those rights, to realize those rights, and then keep that pressure up on governments to deliver on their promises for their citizens. So we're informing a citizenry, right, that is going to then put demands on governments as they take part through civic discourse and other things. And that's going to have an impact. And we're going to be holding people also, I like to say teachers unions have a sort of a built-in social accountability mechanism. Because we're in every single community, a lot of donors say, I'm not sure if that school got built in Maryland County in Liberia. Well, the head of the teachers of Liberia can make a phone call, have someone walk down the street and take a picture and tell you within 5 minutes. So we actually are the eyes and ears, I think, and we can have an impact when we use that influence collectively on behalf of the students of the world.
I think, it's amazing that you are standing with the teachers and amplifying their voice and just sort of organizing, because all of us have had that teacher in our life. They're the most transformative, people who kind of urge you. I mean, I dropped out of school. I've had teachers who kind of said, no, you can do it, and they're absolutely nation builders. How does, Michael, how does your organization go about looking for opportunities without taking unnecessary risk, even though you're in geographies which are really tough?
Well, I think we begin, our national staff, we're overwhelmingly, our staff are from the countries and communities where we work, and then I think gives us an immediate insight into opportunities. And then I go back to communities. you know, all of our work is community-driven, community-led, community-informed, and I think that gives us a certain insight. And then obviously, you know, fora like this, keeping abreast of the broader opportunities for influence, impact, as we've been discussing. We do our homework, but I would credit our staff, who are quite good and quite heroic in their efforts to giving us insights into the best opportunities. And again, it all goes back to communities. It is so simple to say. You'll note I'm the only speaker that has notes up here. I am not a educationalist. I bet 90% of the people in this audience know more about education than me and could be in this seat. But I have learned through a lot of years that, you know, you are as good in this work as your community engagement, and you listen more than you speak. And that gives you insights into opportunities.
I think, you know, being community-led is really the bedrock of all of our work. We always say, you know, it has to be local agent, local message, because you and I going and knocking on a door is not going to convince anyone. So
you can be pretty convincing.
Oh, you should hear the stories of the boo-boos that I've made, like trying to do that. So, you know, sometimes teachers' unions are viewed as uncooperative. How do you address that perception?
I think there's some ministers in the audience that would agree with you, probably, right, David? Yeah, we understand that perception. One of the things that we have in our constitution of EI is we have a commitment to dialogue. That's policy dialogue and social dialogue. We might not agree on everything, but we will institutionalize it and we will sit down and we will talk through. Teachers' unions are representative on the board of the Global Partnership for Education. Education Cannot Wait, the SDG Steering Committee. We are working directly with teachers on the ground. Those are teachers' organizations. They're part of the local education groups. And sometimes they say, you know what, that EdTech platform you just sold me doesn't really work because I don't have electricity or I don't have a way of using it. And therefore, teachers' unions will say, we don't want you to waste money, waste time, and hurt kids. So we have a duty of care to students and to learners and to make sure that what's coming down is actually going to be instructionally, pedagogically appropriate in classrooms. So, you know, and if a school feeding program closes, we may take the streets. If you don't let girls learn, we may take the streets. If you don't pay us for 9 months, you see where I'm going. So sometimes we have to organize and be that. But I find by and large, where teachers' unions are solution-focused and values-driven, you will find a partner that has the same goals as you, as long as your goal isn't to replace them with a computer, right? And I think through COVID, we've come to the conclusion that staying at home with a computer isn't the best thing. So the whole world learned right now we like to be with teachers. We want kids in school with teachers. And teachers' unions want that too, and their organizations. And they're based on rights and democracy. And yeah, they can be a little rambunctious, but I mean, I have 186 of them. So if you only have one, think about it that way. I have 108, actually I have 400 of them in 186, 184 countries and jurisdictions, so 400 of them. So it's tougher to be me.
I was going to say something, but I won't. But thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to sort of just summarize. I think the time for incremental action and incremental goals is gone. COVID and the pandemic is showing us we really need audacious goals. Absolutely, that is the only way forward. To make audacious goals work, I think they have to be articulated very, very clearly. Educate Girls, when we became the TED Audacious Project, even our fieldwork, if you ask them, they would tell you, saying, oh, it's 1.5 million girls in 5 years and in these areas. Like, they have to just be very clear so that everybody from top to bottom can actually understand where we are headed, and that Bible needs to be, and therefore you can bring other people on to join that journey and to join then support that goal. So I think that, and having partners, I think governments as partners, as Catherine was saying, private players, but the real fuel of Audacious goals is patient, flexible, long-term money. Right? It's with TED Audacious, most of the money is unrestricted. The donors are actually giving unrestricted because they know that to chase an audacious goal, you'll have to iterate, you will have lots of different challenges, and having the right fuel is absolutely kind of critical. The partnership, and then obviously making sure that you are operationalizing it on the ground, but influencing everybody else, influencing the global agenda. So I think wonderful themes that have come through in today's 2 panels, and thank you for being a fabulous audience. And I'm really absolutely very, very, very grateful to EAA and to EAC for hosting this.